Hey there. Well, I'm here to talk about Spinoza's God. I'm a little disappointed because I wanted to take you on a little tour of my wife's garden in my backyard. We talked about it at Happiness Hour the other night. It's now where I go in my cooped up, hunkered down mode to actually contemplate things, to clear my head, to be out amongst nature a little bit. It's all relevant, my garden experience, to Spinoza's God. Uh, and I think what I'm going to, I can't do it because I can't make this camera, I don't know how to make the camera move between front facing and back facing while I'm recording. The little button thing goes away. So I think what I might do is do this little talk presentation about Spinoza, and then do a subsequent. For those that like to stay, just do a quick, 1 minute walk to see where actually I think Spinoza's God is living. So you might want to see that. Anyway, I have been working with Spinoza in another class, and I have found him to be incredibly interesting. Uh, I am really enjoyed learning about Epicureanism and Stoicism in Dr. Oliver's class last semester, and Spinoza really takes them up a notch. Spinoza is an interesting guy. He was a Portuguese Jew who was born in Amsterdam. There's a whole big story about the Portuguese Jews that moved to Amsterdam. He's a fascinating guy. He was like super bright. Now this is 17th century. This is 1670s. Uh, Incredibly bright. Uh, at the age of they thought he was going to be a rabbi. But some of his friends kind of told on him about what he was thinking about, and they excommunicated him from the Jewish community when he was 23 and cursed him forevermore. You couldn't talk to him. So this was a big deal, except for Spinoza, whose name is Baruch. His Jewish name was Baruch. When he published his books, he used Benedictus for his scholarly works, but all of his friends called him Bento. Uh, anyway, when he got kicked out of the Jewish community, you'd think that would have upset him, but he just said, what the hell? That means I don't have to deal with them anymore. And he went off and lived a very simple, virtuous life. He ground optical lenses to earn enough money to live on, and worked on his philosophy. Uh, and that's what it's all about. I'm going to grab some notes here because gets complicated, I want to keep it in order. Uh, I took the name Spinoza's God uh, for this presentation because of it's Albert Einstein, who had been asked by a New York rabbi if he believed in God, and Einstein's reply was, I believe in Spinoza's God. I think the idea of Spinoza's God is interesting. It's interesting for us as atheism students to see, uh, but it's really a convenient tool to use when talking to other people, Christian people, in my case, about God. I mean, if you're sitting, if you're having a conversation, I had a conversation here on my patio recently, and with a couple of friends, and it was necessary in the course of the conversation for me to say that I did not believe in the divinity of Christ or the anthropomorphicological God. the Father, God the Father, Creator, personal God. Well, that livened up the conversation, and generally speaking, when you talk about that, you run the risk of being characterized as a godless atheist. And we talked about it at the beginning of the class how atheism can be seen to be negative. But what I found is that if I talk about God, my belief in God as Spinoza's God, then it's a more positive conversation, because then I'm just not denying God. I just have a different concept of God. Well, I thought that's interesting. So it's that's why it's interesting to know about Spinoza's God. Spinoza's point was that if you understand the nature of God, if you understand yourself as part of nature, and you understand your emotions, you can use reason to guide your life. His master work is called The Ethics. The Ethics is divided into 5 parts, which he presents through the 5 parts his big argument, which is how to live well. And that was what Epicurus was about. That's what Epictetus and the Stoics were about, how to live well. The interesting part about the Ethics is he wrote it, his argument, in using the geometrical method and the geometrical form. I would show you, but I would screw it up on this camera. But it's definitions, followed by axioms, followed by propositions, and there's corollaries and lemmas and all sorts of stuff to explain. But it is a step-by-step proof of his points. Proof. A geometric proof. So, and let me tell you, it's hard to read. It's very hard to read. I now actually am kind of enjoying reading it, but it's only because I've been working on it and used a different translation. This book, it's edited by a guy named Runes. So if you want to read the Ethics before you read the traditional major translation, get this book. And it's called, interesting, it's called The Road to Inner Freedom. And that's what it's all about. Spinoza is all about tranquility, the basic Stoic virtue. So, anyway, he's the most interesting person I've come across, although I did, as a person, I really kind of like Descartes. I talked about him the other night. He was a cool guy. Okay, anyway, I want to go through it a little bit. In part 1 of the Ethics, that's where he addresses the nature of God. See, he's got to do a setup here. In parts 3, 4, and 5, he tells you how to live your life. But before he can tell you how to live your life, he's got to give you an understanding of who you are. And to understand who you are, he's got to give you an understanding of God, the nature of God. So he addresses God by using the concept of substance. And substance goes all the way back to Aristotle and probably before. It's the whole metaphysical question of what is a substance? What is a thing? That's the metaphysical questions. I don't know. It's a little bit over my head at the moment. Anyway, Spinoza defines substance as something where there is nothing outside of it. Something that is not limited by another thing. Something that has no boundary, no limits. And he proves in Proposition 14 of Part 1 that there is only one substance, and that substance is infinite, it's indivisible, it is self-created, it's self-caused, it is the cause of itself. There is no external creator for substance. Substance is all that there is. Think universe. Conceive of the universe. The universe, as you conceive it, there is nothing outside of the universe. It's all there is. So that's what he talks about when he's talking about substance. And he calls it God in Part 1. In Part 4, he says God, comma, or nature. That's where we get the sort of pantheistic aspect to Spinoza. Now, the attributes of substance, this one all-inclusive thing, what makes it what it is? Its essence are infinite. It has infinite attributes. Two of them that we know, and they say that's what we know. How we know, I guess that's an epistemological question. But the two that we talk about are thought and extension, consciousness and bodies. So everything else that exists in the universe, in the substance, is simply a modification of the substance. It's a finite mode. It's the way something is. A mode is the way something is. I am a mode. I am a modification of substance. I'm finite. What that means, I think, metaphorically, is that you could say that we are made in the image of God. We are simply finite versions of God. Flawed, but He's perfect. Nature is perfect. We're not. But anyway, but we're made in the image of God. That's consistent, isn't it, with Christian teaching? See, okay, now this infinite substance, God, is not subject to any external contingency. We are subject to external contingencies. They're all around us. I could have a heart attack on the way to show you the garden. Who knows? But I'm finite, so that's to be expected. Not today, hopefully. But anyway, God, nature, being self-caused and unlimited, is free from external contingencies. He doesn't have free will. Spinoza's God does not have free will because nature acts by necessity. The flower sprouting out there follows natural laws. It doesn't have the ability to choose to do something different. And Spinoza's point is, we modes follow natural laws. We're fully determined by the laws of nature. Anyway, that's the point. We're not free. Anyway, I have a note here I wanted to say. I was going to talk about God and say He, but I've now changed. I'm going to start calling God she. Because I'm going to regard God as Mother Nature. And, you don't mess with Mother Nature. All of us are part of a causal chain of events. The natural world follows the principle of causality. Everything is an event that was caused by a prior event that was caused by a prior event. We are how we are because of a series of events in a causal chain. If we're going to understand ourselves, this would be Spinoza's point, if we're going to understand ourselves and our potential for happiness, tranquility, then we need to understand this fundamental point of Spinoza's. We are a part of nature. We're not apart from nature. He uses the phrase, we're not a kingdom within a kingdom. And, many people don't really appreciate that fact. This leads to the conclusion that if a person thinks that they're going to change some of their world experience or how they are experiencing the world through some supernatural cause, like let's say prayer to a God that will intercede against nature on their behalf, or fundamentally that we have free will to the power of free will to change things. We don't. People that think that are relying on a supernatural external cause. And Spinoza's point is there is nothing supernatural. There is nothing outside of nature. So his lesson is important for parts 3, 4, and 5. If we are prisoners of our emotions, if we are controlled by our emotions, which are driven by external cause, and we mix with those emotions what he'll call inadequate ideas, confused ideas, not logical, clear and distinct thinking, we are controlled by our emotions if we do that. If we mix confused ideas with our emotions, we're a prisoner. He said we're in bondage. So how do we get out of bondage? How do we become free? Even though we're determined, we can influence the causal change by our own actions. If we use reason based on adequate ideas, logical ideas, clear and distinct ideas when we're making our choices, if we understand the causes and consequences of our actions and the actions that are being imposed, the forces that are being imposed on us, then we gain power. We gain power over our emotions. It is through active ideas. That's a big thing, and that's too much to go into here. But there's a difference between active ideas, which come out of us, from passive ideas, which are passed on to us. So when we've got all of these pressures coming into us, all of these negative thoughts, let's think maybe a worldwide pandemic where our entire world is changed upside down and you can't go outside because there's viruses out there waiting to attack you. Something like that. Negative stuff. If we use the power of our own rational thinking to understand what's going on and what to do, then we can override those negative emotions. That's the essence of of what Spinoza wants to teach. A couple examples here of confused ideas, and then I won't hold you much longer. Think about that guy driving the truck that says, Jesus is my vaccine. Confused ideas or clear and distinct ideas? Right? Bless his heart. Anybody that is running around out there and is rejecting science based on Jesus' intervention, they're confused. Yesterday, my wife was in a faculty meeting. Their faculty was discussing how they want to deal with their requirements, their personal requirements, when the school decides to open up again. What protections do they want to insist on as professors? And one of the professors in the Zoom conversation basically said that, he didn't wasn't going to worry about any of that stuff, because if he got sick and died, then that would be God's will. I never really do understand God's will. I imagined that this is a guy that goes to heaven, and St. Peter says, well, what are you doing up here? And he said, well, it was God's will, I guess. God's will. God took me. And Peter says, you know what? God sent you those scientists to tell you to stay inside. God did not mean for you to ignore logic. So you're going to have to go to hell where all the other people have confused ideas. Or maybe they have a special room in heaven for just dumbass people. But I don't know. Anyway, I've done a report for Dr. Bombardi. The title of it is The Metaphysical Basis for Pandemic Coping Advice. And basically what I've done is look at the guidelines, the CDC guidelines on how to deal with the stress that we're facing. And in my view, Spinoza could have written the whole thing. I'll guarantee you. The thinking behind that pamphlet and all of the psychologists and all the people that go into it is pure Spinoza. And so I find it very interesting that this 17th century philosopher is so relevant today. Anyway, I hope you take a look at him. Let me show you. I put in the post some books. This is a great book, The Courtier and the Heretic. It's a great book. It talks a lot about, you get a lot about the guy, Spinoza the guy. You also get Leibniz and I can't forget. And then this is a really interesting book, a book forged in hell. This is, when he wrote his first big book was Tractus Theologica Politico, something like that, Politico Theologicus, I don't know, whatever it is. But it basically was the biggest scandal of the day. I think I say in my post that it was it made an incredible splash and had an incredible effect on Western thought. So this is an excellent book. Anyway, that's it. I put some questions. Share your thoughts with me. I leave you with my best wishes, and maybe coming up a brief 1-minute garden tour. So till we meet again, good luck.